Criterion and variant dungeons are just around the corner, and I wanted to really take a moment and explore the healers and how I think that they're going to do in the variant and Criterion dungeons, largely based off of my own experience playing a absolute ton of them, probably too much. And to say the least, after a decade of playing Scholar, I am opinionated as heck. So elephant out of the room first. A Scholar, as we discussed before in the Sage video, has a lot of similarities to the Sage, and while I genuinely do feel Sage has a more of a kit that will excel in dungeon content like Hand Over Fist, my current bet is where the Sage is, and that Sage has the best adapted kit for a dungeon environment with severely punishing damage. Anyone doubting the power, however, of the job that I've made for a decade is horrifically misguided. Scholar is an absolute monster in dungeons, and in current dungeons is decimating. Oftentimes you'll see a Scholar and a Sage both leading the group in terms of output and just using their off-GCD toolkit alone to prop up the party as they go to town spamming DPS spells. Oftentimes I don't even need to use my entire off-GCD kit. Oftentimes I'm just like throwing it out just to throw it out, and I'm like, I didn't need that. So in terms of the rank, easily S tier. Zero question in my mind. So one perk that the Scholar has over the Sage in the damage department is Scholar brings Chain Stratagem. World of Warcraft with Mythic Plus often has a high priority to remove particular mobs from the pack that must be downed immediately, or others get stronger and ultimately wipe the group. Chain Stratagem is an excessively strong damage burst utility that can amplify the group's damage to that single target and spike them down. Sage obviously has Phlegma, but Chain Stratagem buffing the entire group, the DPS, the tank too, is wild for pinpoint DPS pressure. Next perk is that the Fairy is a nice asset of the Scholar because I cannot I can't really stop myself from expressing my years of questioning why Eos and Selene sometimes heal someone I don't want to. Stop healing the chip damage on the DPS when the tank's getting wailed on. But they are a consistent, persistent effect and don't require damage spells to be cast in order to go off. In heat of battle, when you're needing to cast those powerful on GCD Adel or maybe even Sucker, like Eos and Selene will still be pumping. It's going to be amazing. And the nice thing is in this expansion, the Scholar has always really had the option of the Fairy Tether, or lovingly called Fey Union, which used to give me a terrible headache before, but this ability now has had a big range and it is so much snappier to cast. I should say a big range buff, like it's so much longer. You will not have anywhere near the headaches that I used to have in the past, and it's going to just target that specific party member with an enhanced fairy heal until obviously you run out of fairy gauge. So when push comes to shove, after you've built up enough fairy gauge, you do have power to control where the healing goes. I still will overwhelmingly prefer Cardia with Soteria. That is a 90-second no frill no gimmick heal amp, but this isn't a hopeless uphill battle for the Scholar, not at all. Now let's talk about Haima and Panhaima from the Sage and its relation to the Scholar. Undeniably, Haima and Panhaima are outliers in the healer world. They're very, very strong. They're like hand-crammed super duper specifically awesome tools with separate cooldown timers. Absolutely stunning. The hype, it's not hype, it's real. But, and it's a massive Nicki Minaj sized one, is Scholar has a Haima and Panhaima bundled up together in Seraph. Seraph is quite literally Haima and Panhaima wrapped into one ball of 20 seconds of amazing, amazing burst mitigation. Seraph spans out Seraphic Veil, Seraph lets you use Constellation twice. That combined together is excessively powerful mitigation for a tank. When I pop Seraph during a dungeon, a tank, how to say it, I can quite literally shut off my brain and just spam damage. She's just that powerful. But of course, the drawback that you should always keep in your mind is, hey, Seraph has 20 seconds of I've become frickin' Thanos of healers, and then an unfortunate minute and 40 seconds of not being the Thanos of healers, where the fairy is just snapping the damage out of existence. And that's why during the Sage talk I was like, yeah, Haima and Panhaima are great because you get to spread that love around. I already feel the despair of being told I'm dumb and that I shouldn't say Constellation's great on tanks, but in earnest, let's look at this objectively. I have used it this way since Seraph was accessible in Shadowbringers, and it's always been incredible. One cast of Constellation is 500 potency of healing plus barriers. That means both of those casts is 1,000 potency of healing throughput on a single target. Remember, you're solo healing dungeons here, and so it's more likely than ever that the extra healing will actually be healing rather than overheal if you're with a co-healer. It's really, really strong. But you bring another trick to the table as a Scholar. I like to sometimes say that Scholar has tank life insurance. But yes, you don't have Tarkle. I get it. Tarkle's amazing, but you do have Recitation, which guarantees a crit, which provides you with a free cast of Excogitation. A guaranteed critical heal on an 800 potency heal is a massive spike of healing that even on a tank you will absolutely notice, or in my case, probably not notice. because whenever I've used Recitation with Excog on the tank, I've quite literally been allowed to sleep for a minute, and Excog can be used very obviously effectively on its own. It's only a 45-second cooldown, so it's very available to great effect. Excog, every second cast can be used with Recitation though, and that is it's so dumb. Now, obviously, do I think that will be as good in heavy-hitting large pool situations as Sage's Tarkle? No. With heavy-hitting enough packs of mobs, enough mobs hitting you, 10% mitigation simply scales better in the math world. That sort of math always kind of well. But an 800 potency crit heal is just like so good, it's insane. I will always say though, and this is advice that I definitely try and give as many people as I can, always try and cast Recitation early. Earlier the better, to milk the cooldown for everything it's got. You can cast Recitation 15 seconds before you toss out an Excog or Indom. Then you immediately cast Excog, heck, 20, 30, or even 44 theoretical seconds before the tank takes the damage that would pop the effect. And I say it over and over to my Sage and Scholar friends. Use Zoe early, use Recitation early, use Excog early. It's a huge part of the value proposition of these abilities is their duration that cuts down their cooldown. I feel absolutely no different here. First thing you need to do in the dungeon could be like Recitation, Protraction, Excog, or something the moment that you get in. Moving on from there, I also see no reason why when you're casting Art of War, why you can't use fairy abilities Whispering Dawn and Fey Blessing to help round out the damage that the tank takes. These are on short 60-second cooldown timers, and so 21 divided by 3, because that's how ticks work in this game, that's going to equal 7 ticks at 80 potency, or better known as 560 potency of extra healing on a single target. And then Fey Blessing is 320 more potency, so you're quite literally getting nearly 900 potency of healing totally for free that I don't see enough scholars using in dungeons to prop up their tank. Today, I feel that that does make a difference. No different than when I recommend sages to use their Physis cooldown. That heal over time effect is free. You're just gonna let it sit on cooldown? No. Well, especially for Physis, like the heal amp is literally so amazing. And Scholar in a dungeon though is really, in my mind, all about leveraging these different smaller pieces. In fact, I'd argue Fey Blessing is easier to justify to use because Pneuma, which is kind of like, how to say it, I'll get into it in a bit, but Pneuma is such a powerful burst of healing that unless the group is at an emergency, I would prefer to not use it there unless I already have planned for its use. I kind of jumped ahead, but comparing Pneuma to Fey Blessing, people will probably be like, what? Because Pneuma is basically like two Fey Blessings stuck onto one another, and ta-da, you have Pneuma. But moving on to another fairy ability that I don't see used enough is Fey Illumination. Yes, specifically magic damage taken down by 5% is not amazing, but what is amazing is that 10% heal amp with it, which is in the right or wrong situation. I say wrong situation because it only impacts healing spells, so that means Sucker or Adlo, not your off GCDs. This is where Sage's Fizzes wins over Scholars for sure. But let's say you're backed into a corner. You have no Aether Flow, you have no fairy abilities, like all your fairy abilities are spent. You already used Seraph like ages ago, like a minute ago or whatever. You'll reach for this other ability called Dissipation. Boom. Instantly you get Aether Flow stacks again and 20% on GCD. I'm just being very clear about that. It doesn't impact your GCDs. It's going to impact your Sucker and hit Adlo with 20% heal amp. And I do need to reiterate, we're talking about when you are backed into a really gnarly corner. Like, we might see this in Criterion variant dungeons. I actually kind of hope we do because I want to be pushed. But Fey Illumination, Dissipation, Protraction, all of these work together to make sure that you're spamming the tank with Lustrates and Adlos. That will keep the tank sturdy. Just to be super clear, only Protractions impacting the Lustrates. The rest is for Adlo. But heaven forbid you use the ability called Emergency Tactics, and this is one perk Scholar definitely has over the Sage. Emergency Tactics turns Adlo and Sucker berries into healing and has half the cooldown of Sage's equivalent called Pepsis at a low 15 seconds. In fact, that in and of itself makes Scholar significantly more capable in the raw healing department when shoved into a corner solo healing. And remember, these Criterion dungeons are completely solo healing. You don't have a pure healer to look at and be like, well, Medica? Would you Medica? And then like, I don't exist because you're on your own in this dungeon. I mentioned Protraction, which is a Scholar's take on Krasis for Sage, which Krasis is a powerful 20% all healing OGCD included heal amp. Absolutely great, but in Mythic Plus and World of Warcraft, one lesson I learned really quick was tanks die to spike damage, and Protraction, even though it would be weaker in sustaining a tank, and like recovering from damage, it is a very good tool to help offset that spike damage because you're getting that extra padding. Now for Expedient. Everyone knew that this was coming. Obviously, Expedient is a great ability. More mobility in combat will always be great no matter how you slice this. Often, however, in dungeons, I expect if the damage is tuned appropriately, Expedient will honestly flat out be mandatory to stack on the tank with Sacred Soil to offset the damage. Maybe you'd weave it at some other time. We'll really have to see exactly what we do, but in that case, Expedient's going to be absolutely great. The mitigation's always going to be valuable, but let's say tank damage isn't as severe as I'm thinking it will be, well, kind of what I'm hoping it will be. Well, now Expedient shines above the Sage's Holos, because now you have a movement speed ability to resolve mechanics, maybe pull faster, and a variety of other situations. Frankly, Expedient in dungeons is no different than in Raid. Very flexible. If the mitigation isn't needed, use it for the speed. Now, obvious things that we all know still exist for the Scholar, like Scholar can deploy crit adload barriers to make the entire party able to like cheese mechanics. Paired with a Warrior and Bard, this is always going to be comical because they all ramp up that barrier so much. Scholar obviously can cast Ruin too to allow them to dance around the field if the mechanics demand that. And I guess it's time that we talk about damage. Oh yeah, you know that thing? And so in AoE situations, Scholar has their AoE that is like Sage's, fully mobile, no downtime needed, no cast time, can weave in and out of mechanics no problem. Like in dungeons, I'm never really worried about doing damage to Scholar, but in Criterion, one downfall of the Scholar compared to the Sage or Astro is that the Scholar's AoE damage contributions require the Scholar to stand close to the targets in order to cast the damage spells. So does that suck? Depends on how the mobs are when we see them, but casting a ton of AoEs that will like if the mobs are casting a ton of AoEs that will like flatten a Scholar, if you're nearby, you probably don't want to get close, and Sage's Toxicon will be vastly superior in that situation because it at least is an option. And all of that is why Scholar is getting incredible, solid S tier, just behind Sage. I was tempted to give them both S tier, but I do feel like Sage has truly enough of a perk with tank, sustain, and healing, and ranged Toxicon, and all the rest that if we are truly pushed, I think Sage will be able to handle more garbage thrown their way than Scholar can, but like this video said, I'm totally beyond not even close to worried about the Scholar. It will be a dominant force in Criterion dungeons 100%. That's it for this video for now. It'd make me super happy if you tossed a Scholar book at that like button and can't damn that subscribe button. Take care everyone, and I hope that you have an excellent day.